Showtime. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the regular ARB meeting of Thursday, May 15th. If the secretary could please call the roll.
Chair Lippert.
Present.
Vice Chair Pop.
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Present.
Board Member Malone Pritchard. Board Member Guyer. Thank you.
Okay, we have four members present. This is the time for oral communication. Any members of the public may speak to any item not on the agenda today. Do I have any speaker cards? No? Okay. So let's move on to agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Are there any changes to today's agenda?
No changes.
Okay. And with that, we have minutes of March 20th. Has everybody had a chance to read them? Okay, do I have a motion to either approve or are there any amendments?
A couple of corrections that I noticed. On page 4, in the action section, item number 1 should read, the last word should read columns. And item number 5, the last word should be face.
Any other changes or revisions? Okay, can I hear a motion?
have one.
You have one?
Yes.
Oh, let the record reflect that Board Member Malone Pritchard has joined us.
Apologize for being tardy. On that item that Randy was just mentioning, item 5, that face should be the face of curb facing closest to the roadway. It was important to note that it's not the face of curb facing the buildings, but the face of curb at the outside face. The roadway face, yeah. Oh, you did get it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, you want to make a motion there?
So I'll move that we accept the minutes with the revisions noted.
Okay, do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Hi.
That passes 5-0-0-0-0. Okay, so let's move on to the first item. We have a consent calendar item. It is 600 East Meadow Drive, request by Peter Jensen on behalf of the City of Palo Alto, architectural review of the Magical Bridge Playground project located at the southern end of Mitchell Park, Zone District, public facility, environmental assessment. A mitigated negative declaration has been prepared in accordance with the California Environmental Quality Act. And anybody want to pull the item? Okay. Anybody want to make a motion here that we approve or deny?
I'll move that we approve
Okay.
the item as conditioned in the staff report.
Okay. Do I have a second on that?
I will second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Let's vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes 5-0-0-0-0. Okay. We'll move on to the second item, which is minor review, 1213 Newell Road, request by the City of Palo Alto Public Works Department for architectural review of signage, including a request for sign exception for the placement at the main library and art center facilities located in the PF zone, public facility zone. Environmental assessment exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act per section 15301, existing facilities. And would staff like to introduce the item? Are we missing somebody here?
It appears we're missing the staff for that.
Okay. We'll just take a little...
Matt Roschke, Public Works, I believe. I guess Claire must not be able to make it, but senior engineer with Public Works, and We have Group 4 architects to present the item. And this is Palo.
Good morning.
Okay, you'll have 10 minutes, Paul.
Thank you. As this is a readdress of a number of items cited in the previous session, we'll try to keep this very brief and go directly to the agenda items. The package itself is essentially an update from the previous one, so hence its size, but we wanted to be comprehensive about the changes. The items listed in the agenda are specifically cited within the staff report from the previous, and they are the revisions to be made to the process and the proposal. First off, we have updated all of our graphics to indicate that the library is now going to be called officially Rinconada Library. Second, the directory map was an issue, whether or not it was a wayfinding or a directory map. We've enhanced that, and I'll show you that in just a moment. The monument signs and the consolidation of some of the signage that was being incorporated for the parking stalls and things. And then finally, the donor sign. So this is all very familiar. We're very excited with these updated construction progress photographs that show things continuing to move apace on site. Things are taking shape. The continued status of the construction has held a few items in the directory sign at bay, in particular the bicycle parking locations. They're having to navigate some of the routes that are there and to exact the locations before we mark up the final version of that artwork. We're pending their kind of conclusion on those things. This is, we tried to provide a video, but it was a poor quality video from the artist, but this is some illustrations of the permanent artwork that's going to be installed this summer in July. And we include these in part to address some of the comments made about the potential for whimsy and artistic expression on the site. These are 6 large, in fact, 5-foot in diameter objects that will be distributed throughout the site. They were presented and their concept very clarified while we were conceiving the signage. And so that presence on the site was taken into consideration about the sort of stylistic expression of our signage as well. So when we cite the amount of kind of creative imagery on the site, this is part of the overall composition that we were trying to weigh when we were designing the signage for the buildings. So this is an updated site map showing where the signage is going to be. It indicates, and this is that overall survey of the signage. You've seen all of these before, including the kind of schematic outline of for scale and location of the Palo Alto Library and Art Center sign facing onto Newell Road in front of the Art Center. Some of the existing signage on site. So this is the library site signage. Again, noting the consolidation of the pole signs indicating the different parking uses between electric parking, carpool parking, and handicap stalls. So this is all review, but this is where the notes have been revised to indicate that these signs will be dimmable and controlled with a centralized lighting system so that they will be dimmable after hours, and the building sign on the ID sign on the building itself can be turned off, indicating that the building is open or closed. So both the monument signs and the building ID sign have been integrated into the building's control system. As for the orientation of the signs, we modeled and did some analysis looking at taking these and rotating these 90 degrees. And through the discussion in-house, it really felt like turning them 90 degrees was more of a commercial orientation intended to sort of capture attention as opposed to the sort of historic precedent we were working with, that they're kind of facing out and more frontal to the street. That's how they've been. It also enabled us to not add any other conduit or added expense for the location of the power and controls to them. And this is the expanded version of the wayfinding sign, and here's the larger illustration of that directory sign, incorporating the building logos and also specific destinations on the site. So though it stands at 5 feet, it actually is intended to be legible both for adults and children, and really enumerate the various items throughout the site for people going to and from it. Also indicated are the locations of these signs. And this is the sign that will be updated with final locations of the different bicycle parking stalls and things. This also, the notes now reflect the dimmable controls integrated with the building control systems. And that's actually the scale of those artworks. They will have a presence. And the donor sign itself, as we've discussed in the past, is consistent with the one that's already going to be installed and essentially mocked up on the main downtown library across the way from here, and also the one that's set to be installed at Mitchell Park. All three of them will be finalized once all of the donor contributions and names have been tallied for the three different projects, consolidating that overall bond measure production for the city. So these will all be kind of installed at the same time, probably in the fall this year. And these are the color coding for the different stalls, so that when we'll paint the wheel stops and then have a single pole sign that kind of consolidates the three of them, or four, as the case may be. So effectively, we've taken all of your direction and had no problem incorporating that into the revisions. And so we feel that this kind of as a whole is capable to be proposed, and we hope you all accept it. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire Campbell, did you have anything that you wanted to add from the staff report?
Thank you. Sorry about being late this morning. Just to clarify about the sign exceptions, if it wasn't already made clear, the two components of the project that require sign exceptions are the freestanding signs, and the freestanding signs, the sign code only allows one freestanding sign per street frontage of a parcel. So this project has two being proposed, so that's the first one. And the second one is for the unique sign type of the donor wall plaque. So the sign code doesn't cover this type of special purpose sign, and so that's before you today for your review. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is the time we will open the public hearing. Members of the public may speak to this item. Do I have any speakers that wish to address this? Okay, I will close the public hearing. I'll return to the board for comments and a motion. We'll begin with Board Member Malone Pritchard.
I'm fully in support of what you have brought forward today. So,
Vice Chair Pop.
No comments or questions at this point.
Okay. Board Member Guyer.
Same here.
Board Member Liu.
I have some questions for staff. So there's a third monument sign that's been discussed at a preliminary level, and then I was wondering if at this time if staff thinks that there's findings could be met for a third monument sign.
So I think we're talking about the corner project when that comes forward. I do think that when the time comes and it's brought forward to the board, that sign exceptions will likely be able to be met for that type of sign as well. This campus is a unique city facility, and I think creating a special designation sign would be something that we could find support for. But we'll take a look at it, I guess, when the time comes. Thank you.
And then I have a question for you, Paul. On the just on one of the directory signs, there's one that's sort of towards the back entrance of the Art Center, and I was wondering about the placement of that.
Yeah, that was created because of the large amount of parking that's directly east of the Art Center. And sometimes people can come in from Embarcadero and not have any other orientation with frontage signage, so we wanted to be able to provide that orientation there as well.
And then if I recall correctly, there's no sidewalk or anything back there. So are you just putting it on the curb, or is there a new sidewalk being added as part of your connective?
There is, did I get a mouse? Okay. Yes, there is a new sidewalk that cuts through, that provides access from the parking here to the garden center and to the back court area for the library. And so it's positioned in landscape off of paving so that people will be able to see that and make their way throughout the site.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Thank you. I think my only comment, and but I'm in support of the project, is that the library and art center monument sign. I looked at it again, just the location, and I don't think anybody's gonna from the road. I don't think anybody's gonna see it. I looked at it from various different angles.
The library sign or both?
The combined library art center monument sign. Just the way it's closer to the street than the other one, and I looked at it from various angles in the street, and I just don't think it's going to do what it should do as a sign. But I don't object to it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, as you say, it's been, the sign location has been there, yeah. So I think it's fine. It seems kind of strange to me though to have like a 9-foot sign that really doesn't give you much visibility. So, but the signs look good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On the directory sign, I had mentioned previously, I guess, about braille or tactile, making it a little more tactile so that blind people could find their way through. Have you?
Yeah, it's not a requirement, and it's the signs frequently are off paved areas, and we looked into being able to. We would have to do the entire map as a raised braille navigation system, and we opted not to go ahead with that.
Okay. And talk a little bit more about the orientation of the monument signs at the street. We did have, I did receive an email, I guess, or a comment from a member of the public who lives across the street, concerned about the illumination, particularly the hour cutoff, and then the orientation.
Yeah, the sign elements themselves. It's not just the. Well, as I was describing before, the orientation of the signs, A, is a precedent, and B, looking around at various facilities around the city and other precedent signs of similar scale, what really struck us was the consistency of commercial signage being that perpendicular kind of real attention-grabbing kind of orientation. And this having a function of a public facility, it really felt more like almost like a title bar, almost kind of just, it didn't seem to have the same obligation to kind of capture customers and things. It's a slow-moving street, and pedestrians and cyclists and things, we felt that the size and their presence, whether it be set back to 25 feet for the library sign or just the 10 feet or so for the combined sign, still provided that while being consistent with other facilities in the city. And lastly, looking at the frontage opposite that, these signs, we've got a switching station, we've got a fire department, we've got a tennis court, and only one resident, and that building is due for demolition for reconstruction of a new building. Only when you get beyond that across the street do you come into a multi-unit housing facility. So there's really very little permanent neighbors directly across the street for this to impact, and so we've opted to kind of persist with this.
It's also a little unusual, though, for the city to have an internally illuminated monument sign.
True.
So that's not in precedent either.
Right. We had to kind of add something to the deal. We didn't want to just repeat the same kind of almost Boy Scout aesthetic routed redwood signs, which have been a great presence here in the city. So that we felt that between the additional elements of the building itself and its kind of refinement relative to the original building, we wanted to extend that same, a little bit more jazz to the signs out on the street as well.
Okay. And then one last question on the electric vehicle charging. Is purple the new green?
Well, we've noticed that in other city signage, and we can coordinate that more tightly with exactly what the city standards are. But we just wanted to be able to account for that so that there's a paint color accounted for in the bid package that we're going to pursue soon.
Because my understanding is that the city is now going to be implementing or requiring vehicle charging stations for new development.
I don't know if that's true for all commercial development, but it certainly is a city objective on the public facilities.
Can the chief planning official say something about that?
Yeah, I know that for residential, we require stub outs for the EVSE. But I'm not certain if are you referring to all city projects? Because we know
I think that's it's pending. It's pending is
right.
that for new commercial development, like out in the research park and other
private development.
Yeah, private development. They were going to begin requiring. Where I'm going with this, I guess, is what the city standard is going to be for electric vehicle charging stations, so that it's consistent with.
Yeah, I don't know the standard. We can get back to you on, if there's anything that's been formally written up. I didn't attend the last green building team meeting, so maybe something came up there.
Okay. Just to say, I'm not thrilled with the orientation of the illuminated monument signs. I think that it still needs additional work. I'm not convinced that it's going to be glaring and intrusive into the residential neighbors across the street. So that's my main concern. And I just feel that there also should be a consistency in terms of the electric vehicle charging station signs, so that it's a city standard. So
absolutely,
whatever we have used in the city, it should be consistent throughout all public facilities. So anybody wish to make a motion here?
A follow-up question?
Sure, please.
So I have a question for you, Paul.
Yeah.
We have something called, the illuminated cabinet box sign, which we kind of discourage in the city, although it's not prohibited. And then I think what you're proposing is like the 3-form, which is a just really beautiful material, which you're saying that the LEDs would be top or mounted, so you're getting a glow of this. Correct. Versus a direct outward
correct.
beam. But I've never seen one before. I've seen 3-form, and I've seen, but I've never seen that. And I was wondering how you came up with this type of sign.
Well, I think it is perhaps consistent with some of all of your reactions to backlit translucent lighting. That it can be very bright. And we wanted this to have a similar level of, I guess, the word from a previous planner here in the city was a sereneness, we didn't want this to be a real jarring image, but we did want it to have a presence through into the evening. And so the lighting elements themselves are concealed within the opaque bar where the Palo Alto sign is. And because of the translucent material, it catches light. It in effect glows, and there'll be a very subtle gradient from the bottom up. We're talking with various signage consultants to developing this sort of model. We're going to actually mock this up once it's approved, and so we know we can go forward, and then we can start to fine-tune that so that we can get the light levels that'll be satisfactory. And we'd be happy to come back and share that process with you as we go forward.
Great, thank you.
Any other discussion here?
I'd like to make a motion.
Please.
I move that we approve this project along with the sign code exceptions consistent with the staff recommendations and the conditions of approval in the report, with the additional condition that the monument sign orientation be further evaluated and brought back to staff for final decision about where it will be placed exactly, and that you communicate with the Transportation Division in order to appropriately assign colors to the different types of spaces that you're designating. And for the staff, if there is not a standard for that currently, that needs to be something that gets established right away.
Do you have a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay. You wish to speak to your motion at all? Do you wish to speak to the second? Okay, any discussion here?
May I make a friendly amendment?
Please.
I'd like to suggest that in the findings for approval in the sign code exceptions, that we add a statement in finding number 1 that there are 2 related but distinct buildings and functions on this site. Because for me, that was an important reason to allow 2 separate signs. If it were one building, I would not have wanted to approve 2 separate signs.
Is that acceptable?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And I have a friendly amendment. I believe that the orientation and the study of the monument sign as well as the mock-up should probably go back to subcommittee and be resolved there. Is that acceptable?
I mean, just, can I poll the board about that?
Please,
Yeah.
it's discussion.
So I'd just like to see if anyone else feels strongly about the orientation of the sign before we obligate them to coming back to a meeting versus just interacting with staff about that.
Actually, I'm in agreement with staff's decision that this isn't something that you have to worry about people driving by at 40 miles an hour and catch it. So I think the orientation, the way they prefer it, I like.
And I prefer the orientation as presented.
I agree that the orientation as presented is appropriate, and so I'm going to decline your suggestion.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and we have a friendly amendment in there from Claire. Sorry, Board Member Malone Pritchard. So any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So that passes 5-0-0-0.
Thank you very much, all of
Thank you very much for your
I
time.
appreciate it.
Okay, we're going to move on to item number 3. This is a preliminary review, correct?
Right.
Yeah, okay. So it's 4146 El Camino Real, request by the Hayes Group on behalf of Su Chen Wan and Chung Chin Jan for preliminary architectural review of a new 3-story multifamily residential condominium building with 1 level of below-grade parking. The zone district is RM15. Environmental assessment, preliminary architectural reviews are exempt from review under the California Environmental Quality Act. And with that, if staff would like to introduce the project, please.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Chair Lippert and board members. So the application before you this morning is a preliminary review. So as a preliminary review, there will be no decision made at today's hearing. The purpose of the hearing today is just to get comments and feedback from the board to the applicant so that they can get design direction on their proposal and their concept. Concept is for a new 21-unit condominium project. It's a combination of 1 and 2 bedroom units. There would be a total of 2 buildings, 3 stories, over a parking podium. In staff's analysis of the proposal, we have found that it is relatively compliant with city codes and guidelines, specifically the South El Camino Real guidelines. They've brought the building close to the street, creating that urban edge and wall along El Camino while still setting it far enough back to create a wide sidewalk at the street. One of the comments and areas that we'd like the board to focus on is that we feel that the way that they've addressed the street needs further refinement. It feels that the wall and the height of that kind of reduces that connectivity from the pedestrian level to the project. There's an expectation that there would be pedestrian entries and stoops along the sidewalk, and so we're looking for comments from the board to see if we could address a better pedestrian experience along the frontage of the project. Another issue that was identified was that in the proposal they currently have too many tandem spaces. They're allowed 25% of the parking spaces to be tandem, and they've exceeded that, and we've worked with the applicant and they're going to be refining the project to address that issue. Another issue that was brought up by a couple different departments, transportation and public works, is they would actually like to see pedestrian connectivity between the project and Thane Way behind. Kind of makes good planning sense to improve connectivity. Transportation would like the ability for children that might be living within the development to be able to walk through Thane Way rather than going around El Camino, which is a much busier street. But we've heard very loud and clear for quite some time from the Barron Square residents that live on Thane Way that they do not want any access from this project through to Thane Way. So we've also heard that, but looking for the board to weigh in on how they feel about that issue. In order to implement the project that has been brought before you, a zone change would be required. So formal application for amending the zoning from RM15 to RM30. It would effectively allow for the additional 10 units that they're requesting over and above the RM30 zoning, which would limit the units to 11, and they're requesting 21. So with that, I will turn it over to the applicant to make their presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Hayes, you will have 10 minutes.
The roller ball will advance.
And while Mr. Hayes is setting up, just for the members of the public, after Mr. Hayes makes his presentation, we'll open the public hearing. If all of you could fill out speaker cards and hand them into a staff member, we will call your name when it's time for you to speak, and each of you will have 3 minutes.
Ready?
Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Ken Hayes with Hayes Group Architects. I'll be presenting the project on behalf of our client, the Wan family. Very easy. I'd like to also thank Russ and staff for helping us bring the project before you this morning. The site, as you know, South El Camino, it is, I get this cursor working. There we go. Highlighted in yellow here, this is the Barron Square property here and Thane Way, just to kind of orient you. There, Maybell Drive comes in here, our site's here. We're completely surrounded by PC projects. Other zoning districts in the area are a CS zone here further south. Across the street is nearly all CN, but then it gets into higher density residential, RM30, RM40 in this area here. And more PCs as you move down El Camino Real. Some views of the site from El Camino Real looking south, looking north. So it's a vacant site. It's about 3/4 of an acre. This is looking into the site. On the right-hand side is Barron Square as it comes in from El Camino, and then towards the back is also part of the Barron Square project. It's a pretty heavy foliage line along both those property lines right now. If there was connectivity, it would be back in here somewhere, most likely. However, right now, the Barron Square neighborhood actually is able to go down on the other side of this hedge out to El Camino Real. That's all their property as it kind of doglegs around. And a view from across the street shown here. Our program is to change the zoning from an RM15 to what I think is more appropriate for El Camino, being a major transportation corridor, to RM30, develop 21 multifamily 1- and 2-bedroom condominium units. They're going to range from about 650 square feet for the 1-bedrooms to about 1,130 square feet for the 2-bedrooms. The program was to create sort of smaller buildings so that we could have independent entrances to the outside, so we avoid any kind of internal corridor and stair circulation system, so it's connected to the outside in a better way, and then provide outdoor common space as well as private outdoor yards and balconies for the residents. And the goal is to create a modern residential building that responds to the site, incorporates daylighting, uses sustainable materials, and really enhances the living experience there. Minimize the visibility of parking and trash and utilities, which we've put to the rear of the site or below grade. Reinforce the street edge of El Camino with building form and repetitive with rhythm. Create pedestrian amenities, and I have some ideas on that as we get to the further in to the presentation, but activity and entry points, and then also provide a buffer to El Camino. I mean, it's great to have connectivity, but I don't like the idea of a front door spilling right on out to El Camino Real. We looked at some alternative site planning concepts. These are sort of ring road or ring driveway concepts here with the project in the center and parking around the perimeter. and kind of variations on that, and beginning to address El Camino here in a way. And then we kind of got onto this idea here where we really try to get a repetitive building form and get private outdoor yards or common space sort of behind the, I lost my cursor, behind the building. And then that evolved to this concept here, which is where we're headed, or where we would like to head with this project. So this is a blow up of the site. We really have a strong neighborhood force stay away from Barron Square. We obviously, that's reinforced by the desire to come up to El Camino, but we also have sun angles from the rear of the project sort of faces southeast, or rather southwest. You can see where the sun angles are. So having outdoor space at the back would be sort of a fun, or a sun-filled space. Again, pushing the buildings up to El Camino, we have a 20-foot setback, we have a 12-foot sidewalk, and then we have a buffer zone and some small outdoor yards happening along there. Our main driveway is to the south, so you go past the project, you see, orient yourself, you pull into the driveway, and that is a ramp down to below-grade parking. You come up from the below-grade parking to an elevator core here in the center of the site. You pop up, you're outside, you're in this nice outdoor space. If you're a pedestrian from the street, you come in here, sort of you arrive at the same central space. And then this is an ancillary egress way off the podium level. And then there's our sunny outdoor space at the back of the building. All these trees here are pretty much existing at the rear of the site. Again, the buffer. And then really trying to get a connection, and it's not developed yet, but we have some ideas that we can share with you. But these are all private yards for the ground floor flats. The unit's oriented like this. Here's El Camino Real. We are up 4 feet. We're trying to get a balance of cut and fill, taking some cut here, placing it here, raising the building pad 4 feet. It'll be gradual when you walk in, but we think it gives a nice separation, almost like you'd find in a row house where you have half a flight up to get to the front door. However, our front doors aren't on El Camino. They're off this space in back. This is a yard off the El Camino side, and then we sort of terrace down with a 2-foot planter, back 4 feet, I think, and then a 2-foot planter. And we had a fence, but it wasn't developed yet. And I don't think a solid fence is appropriate, neither does staff, so we have some ideas on how that can work. You can see the unit, the ground floor is a flat, and then we have a townhouse that sort of wraps around. It's very interesting geometry. And then this is the one, this is 2-bedroom, this is 2-bedroom, this is a 1-bedroom flat. You can see again how the tuck under parking works here. Barron Square is back here, and again El Camino out here on the frontage. The units look like this in plan. The ground floor flat here. El Camino would be on this side, and this has an entrance here all by itself off of a small yard, and then you have exterior stair that takes you up to this level, where that would be the first level of the townhouse, which would then go up a stair to this level. Or you walk into the second floor flat, which is just a 1-bedroom unit right here. This is a view from El Camino. Hotel to the south, 2-story. 3-story multifamily project to the north. This is kind of the Barron Square tennis courts and some small garage structures in there before it goes back to the larger project behind. Our project is infilled here, and obviously at 3 stories is quite appropriate to the scale, I think, of El Camino in that area. Looking at the building a little bit further, we have this play of shed roofs to relate to some of the residential buildings in the area, but also a flat roof section that can be clad in wood. We're trying to get a lot of depth in the facade, and I think you see that here. This is the El Camino side, so we have this repetitive form that marches down El Camino, but we have about a 16-foot setback to where the building goes up to three floors. So there'll be a lot of depth along El Camino. Same thing is true on the back side. I know the residents were concerned about a 3-story. The residents at Barron Square have contacted me, and they were concerned about, one resident contacted me, concerned about some of the view angles, and I have a diagram in here I can show you. But we're also set back at the back of the building where we're 2 stories, and then it bumps up to 3 stories. So it's not a 3-story mass on the perimeters, let's say. This is the view from the south of the end of each building, And this is the view from the north on the end of the beach building. So that two-story form kind of wraps around and clads the three-story element. And this is where the stair would rise to the entry to go into either the townhouse, the two-story townhouse, or the flat, which would be in this zone here. Some perspectives of the project. This is looking from the north to the south on El Camino, let's say above, as though I were flying over. Shows the El Camino edge here, the repetitive form here, lots of glass opening to El Camino. There's balconies that face El Camino along that edge. Barron Square comes in here and wraps around like that. Our parking is at the rear and depressed, and then this is the outdoor space at the rear, which you can probably see better here. This is the view from the rear above Barron Square looking down, where again you see the two-story form in repetitive fashion, and then the shed roof of the third floor element. The driveway comes in here, wraps around. We're burying the trash and recycling enclosure down here, well away from any kind of view of the public. Utilities will be in the subterranean area as well. We will have a transformer out on the El Camino Real edge, but parking obviously is also screened from public view. But this becomes sort of the outdoor space back here, which will be hardscape and landscape on the podium for the residents. El Camino Real view. And so this is what we're thinking, is that what we haven't done yet is shown any kind of stair connection. But in talking with staff and transportation, transportation has some great ideas. We would create some connections into each of the yards for El Camino Real access, and those would be little stairs. And the reason we didn't have it originally is we thought that they all had to be accessible, and so we'd have to have a ramp going into each, and it was just going to be something that we didn't want to go down that path on. But we've got confirmation. We don't need to do that we have confirmation from everybody that we're comfortable with that we can, in fact, provide steps. And so what we're thinking is that we have this 12-foot sidewalk, step up 2 feet, you could hang out on the wall, but then we'll do these cut-ins that will be these stairs that will come up, and we'll have like maybe a nice wood gate or something that's low, but then that wood gate would be solid, but then it would transition to what we're thinking is landscaping on top of that wall that might have a fence within it that is a chain type fence or a wire fence or something, so that it doesn't present itself as a solid wood fence, and we think that that helps lower this profile. You can see the scale of somebody if they were in the yard above. They have no problem seeing over, but somebody walking down El Camino can't look into their living room, for instance. You can see the people here. They wouldn't be able to look into the living room. So we have balconies also that face the street. And this is a view from the other direction. This is walking north on El Camino. And again, the same thing would occur as you come in there. So we thought that this would create a really nice street edge along El Camino and achieve some of the goals that the El Camino Real guidelines had, but also make the project, I think, a little bit more appealing. This is the diagram really done for the Barron Square neighbor that called me. There's about, 50 feet between the fence line and their building. And they do have some garages back in this area, but for the purpose of this study, if we had a two-story building, I explained it would be larger on the site. And so that's why we showed this building larger in sort of profile. It's about an 11-degree angle to the roof line. This is a two-story building, complies with daylight plane, complies with setback. Someone standing right at the building wall will see the building, roof, this is at 11 degrees. Keep in mind there's a bunch of trees right here that really are going to block your view. This is the view 3 stories, but further away, because we do have the parking area here, and that's an 11-degree angle, and that is my presentation. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, this is the time when we'll open the public hearing. Members of the public that have something to say may do so at this time. You have a speaker card, sir? Okay, great. Please give them to the staff member and we'll call you. Thank you very much. Okay, I have 2 speaker cards here, Jeffrey Eustace, followed by Ruth Lowy. So you'll have 3 minutes, Mr. Eustace. And if there are any other speakers, please get a card into one of the staff members.
My name is Jeff Eustace, and I own 539 Thane Way in the Barron Square condominium complex adjacent to the proposed project. On May 7, I submitted written comments, which I understand are in the board's package. I believe that the board and the community need additional information to make a decision, and that the proposed application should be supplemented. Specifically, I believe that a visual impact study with particular reference to Barron Square is necessary. I understand that visual impact studies involve taking photographs from several specified points, which are called receptor sites, and then drawing the proposed structures on these photographs. My suggestion is to select several receptor sites directly in front of the Barron Square buildings closest to the proposed structures. In addition, the applicant should address any potential reduction of direct sunlight on Barron Square units or common areas. Some of this I see has been done. I understand the developer is proposing rezoning to go from a permitted 11.5 units to 21 units. As this would likely result in a multi-million-dollar benefit to the developer, I feel it is necessary that the board have more complete information to make its recommendation. This would include a detailed visual impact study prepared by the developer and submitted as a supplement to the present application. Thank you for your service and for your consideration of these comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eustace. Ruth Lowy, if there are any other speakers, please get a card in.
Good morning. I'm Ruth Lowy. I live in 551 Thane Way in the Barron Square community. I'm a resident there for about 23 or 24 years, and the community itself is about 34 years. I think we opened in 78 and 79. What I'd like to point out is that the project being under review is on a 3/4 of an acre lot, and I personally feel that is really a very dense project for such a small parcel of land. So I don't know if there's a way to make it less dense, but that would be one of my comments. The other thing I'd like to point out that I didn't even think about right now until some comments by Russ Reich is our community, even though we're on Thane Way, it has its housing on both sides of the street, and so we are really a very integrated complex. The former Camino Card Club, which now has housing, and Interdale, all have been integral to itself. None of the communities are coming through and across any of our properties. And I think that that's a very good idea because people know themselves within the community, and I think that should be maintained. Thank you.
Thank you. I will leave the public hearing open while we return to the board for questions. We'll begin with Board Member Liu.
I have a question for staff. So, because a rezoning is required, could you just maybe explain for everybody the process of that going to, I'm presuming, like BTC, and
Yes.
And then it would come back to the board here for a final review?
Yes. So as was described, this is a preliminary review. It's a separate application just to start the conversation about development of the site. It is not an actionable application. What the applicant can submit, is a rezoning to increase the density and request that. That would initially go to the city, to the Planning and Transportation Commission to discuss that. And then they would refer that to the City Council with a recommendation. Now, the applicant can choose to go through for a pre-screening, which is called a preliminary review at council level, and that's something that the applicant may choose to do to get a read from council. Another thing is, yes, then after the rezoning initiation, the applicant could submit a formal application for ARB review, and that is a requirement for the board to weigh in, and along with an environmental document on the specifics of a more detailed project.
Just to add to that, there would also be the requirement for a subdivision for the 21 condominium units. We've actually had discussions with the applicant of moving all applications forward at the same time, such that the council and the public would have the benefit of actually seeing what would possibly result if the rezoning were to be approved. Council in the past has had difficulty with rezonings when they can't see what the resulting project is. So potentially moving forward, the application for the project along with the subdivision, along with the rezoning, would go forward through the review process altogether and go for Planning Commission, Architecture Review Board, and City Council.
And adding to that again, because it's an ownership project with a subdivision map, which I'd forgotten about, there would be a requirement for below market rate housing because it's ownership. And that's something that would then be discussed with the applicant as to, the units, the number of units provided, et cetera.
And that was my next question, which is about like the affordable housing density bonus, and is that being factored in? I mean, no, this is just a preliminary, but is that?
There haven't been any concessions requested. The requirement for BMR would be 15% of the total units, but we haven't seen any concessions requested at this point.
So for for 15% affordability, affordable units, they could request one concession, and there's a menu of concessions per the density bonus ordinance that says what type of concessions can be requested. If the applicant wanted to provide more affordable housing, there are other concessions, including an increase in density.
I will pass at this time. I'll have more comments later.
Board Member Guyer, do you have any questions?
No, actually, that was my only question at the moment, so I'm good for now.
Okay. Vice Chair Pop.
So, for staff again, in conjunction with the affordable units, can you remind me, please, how does the by right parking requirements when you provide the affordable units affect a project like this? It seems like to some degree they've got actually more parking than they'll need to have, because the ratio of parking for units changes, and the ratio, I think the guest parking goes away entirely. Is that accurate?
That is correct. The guest parking, and Russ recently was the project planner on the 3159 El Camino, where that was part of the deal, is the guest parking being, because of the affordable housing, was not required to be provided.
Right. For this project, that's not the case. They haven't requested to implement that parking reduction. So that's not currently on the table.
So just not taking advantage of it, but it's available to them, right?
My understanding is if they are providing affordable units, that it would be available to them.
Okay. I'm just thinking about how they are going to resolve the issue of too much tandem and just sort of managing.
We're looking at possibly using puzzle lifts to avoid the tandem parking issue.
That's the
yeah,
other,
it is an option.
The other end of the scale. Okay.
It is an option to take advantage of that affordable housing, is to not provide the guest parking.
Okay.
But they may want to provide the guest parking anyway.
Okay. And then in the comp plan, is this a housing opportunity site? I couldn't find the information about that, but
Yeah, it is on the housing opportunity
and
site.
is it described as an RM30 potential?
It's shown as RM15, and they didn't address any residentially zoned vacant parcels or otherwise parcels along El Camino in the recent discussion about density bonus on El Camino. They just focused on the CN zone sites.
Okay, so there was a process back in, I'm going to say 2008, where a number of sites along El Camino were rezoned that were essentially just these little pockets of RM, if I remember right, it's mostly RM15, and they were changed to CN or something else. Why was this not part of that? Was there some reasoning behind that? Do you have any recollection of that? I certainly don't.
Yeah, I don't know why it wasn't touched or why it wasn't discussed in the last discussion about the housing element, where they were discussing, increasing density on the CN zone sites and requiring mixed use on those. I mean, perhaps we can get back to you on that when the formal.
I'm just anticipating a discussion with the Planning and Transportation Commission about whether RM30 is the right designation for this site, or whether, consistent with across the street and many other sites around, if that's where it's going to head. And my understanding is that if it does get zoned CN, that then the criteria is that we go back to the comp plan to see what the site was designated as in the housing opportunity list, and if it's RM15, that becomes challenging.
Well, okay, so the CN zone is associated with RM15 density. The CS zone is associated with RM30 density.
That's in a mixed-use development, though, isn't it?
Well, it used to be
if it's a
that
residential-only project.
Yeah, it used to be that you could just do only residential. Under a CN zone site, you could provide just a purely residential project. That's no longer the case. But so I'm just saying, for the equivalency, if this had been zoned CS years ago, an RM30 project could have been done without any mixed use.
Okay.
Because it's zoned strictly residential, there's no requirement for them to do commercial, but they are currently restricted to RM15 unless they go through the density bonus.
So we'll see where this plays out. Okay, and then let's see. I guess the only other question I have is about the El Camino frontage at the pedestrian level. To a degree, even if they propose a different style of fence, right? We're going to see landscaping and other things there, and potentially have almost an 8-foot high wall along that edge. I didn't find in the South El Camino guidelines anything specific about height of walls fronting El Camino, those types of discussions, but do you have any guidance that you can provide or information you can share about the intent?
I wish I had a copy of it with me here. The intent is to provide that kind of pedestrian-friendly environment along El Camino. Staff feels that an 8-foot tall wall doesn't achieve that. I'm sure Ken, in his formal iterations, will come up with a better detail to address that. One of the suggestions that we have looked at is lowering the elevation of that patio area so that you're not having to come 4 feet off the ground before you start that level, and then potentially have some kind of landscape or wall screening. So we're looking to see how he resolves that, but we're looking for a softer, friendlier pedestrian environment on El Camino.
Okay. Thank you.
Board Member Malone Pritchard. Questions?
Questions only. Okay. A question for staff. Thane Way, is that a public street or is that part of the
That is a
condominium?
public street.
Okay. That is my only question.
Okay. Members of the public, this is your last call. If you have any cards, please get them into staff. After I ask my questions, we're going to close the public hearing and return to the board for comments. So I have a couple of questions for the architect. Mr. Hayes. Okay. You have all that below-grade parking and it's sort of exposed there. Did you look at covering more of that and creating more surface area for the residents in terms of open space and also connectivity to the cul-de-sac?
The connectivity to the cul-de-sac was something that we didn't consider because of the strong feelings of the Thane Way neighbors. So that was off the table from our standpoint after listening to them. We went and met with them before we started designing the project. That really came from transportation and planning, as to trying to create a connection there. And it's not for necessarily Thane Way residents to come through our private site, but rather for our residents to be able to go through that public street to get to the school and further down Barron Road. So it's a good idea. It's going to take some redesign of that back parking area. To answer your question on that parking area, we are essentially stopping the podium deck, which is shown here, at the edge of the parking stalls that are 90 degrees this way, Lee. And then it goes under this whole area here, which is where a lot of the tandem spaces are covered. So we essentially have, we have, I think, 10 feet here, but then the parking and the parking aisle is exposed to the sky. I mean, the next step is you'd have to go all the way across a 25-foot driveway, and that was just a little bit too much.
Okay. And, part of our, I guess, the city's standards is that they like developments that reinforce the street grids in the city. And so Thane Way, it finishes at a cul-de-sac. Is there a way to create connectivity from, I guess, Thane Way to El Camino Real without sort of impacting the neighborhood there?
So let's go to the site. So here's the cul-de-sac is approximately right here. The Barron Square neighbors enjoy a path, and there's a gate down here. I believe they can come out to El Camino through that gate. If we create a connection, it would be along this edge where we already have a connection here to get up to this area. So it'd be a matter of, right now our garage is open on this side and set back 10 feet and higher than the adjacent grade. So we would need to figure out some way to get back down and across to this rear area. Haven't done that yet.
Mm-hmm. What about, because you have that landscape corner there?
A stair?
Well, what I'm looking at here
You're looking at that right there, Lee?
Yeah, right there you have a little green area.
That'd be a lot easier way of doing it.
What about completing the cul-de-sac, and creating some sort of pocket park there or something, the terminus for the for both the residents of Thane Way as well as the Barron Square residents as well as the residents of the new development?
I think the synergy for our residents is going to be here. This is right out their front door. Mm-hmm. This is where our outdoor space is. I think the Barron Square neighborhood has plenty of outdoor spaces. This is actually helping us for our filtration. This is down at the garage level, Lee. This is not up at grade. And so we're basically taking our rainwater essentially over to this area for filtration. We're kind of, because of this is a podium, there's really, there are very little places where we can take it. I thought you were going to, maybe there's some kind of a vertical circulation element here that can go up to, up to Thane Way as a way of creating a linkage. And I had not thought of that, and that's where I thought you were just going just now. But that would be one way to maintain the filtration effect of this and also create a connection.
Okay.
So a park was not discussed.
Okay. And then lastly, did you look at reversing the orientation of the ground floor units so that they actually have the main entrances off of El Camino Real? I mean, you still have to come up to the up in an elevator
right,
to the level and then go to your units. But why not turn those ground floor units around so that their front doors are oriented towards El Camino Real?
Then we do have a problem with accessibility. So the main entrance needs to be accessible on all these units. And so to get the edge reinforced and to provide accessibility to the ground floor flats, because there's an elevator that serves that level, so that is by definition the ground floor, they need to be accessible and they need to have the main entrance needs to be accessible. So that was one technical concern. But we felt stronger about getting main entrances sort of all together so that it becomes more of a community on the backside and you don't have sort of front doors and then the other residents on the inside. I believe in the idea of the connectivity visually and to have eyes on the street, et cetera. I'm not real excited about the idea of walking out your front door and being on El Camino. There's a new project up in Menlo Park that sort of just does that just south of Safeway on El Camino, which I don't think is an appropriate form of development on a thoroughfare like El Camino. But having spaces where people can congregate, residents that live there in their backyards or looking out, that's sort of where we were headed. So no, we did not put the entries there for those reasons.
Okay, I'll return to that later. What I'm basically looking at is there's quite a bit of how shall I say, a lot of people were not very enthusiastic about
to the south?
Arbor Real, and the way Arbor Real turns its back on El Camino Real. Oh, that rhymes. And so I'm trying to avoid that specifically. Okay, so members of the public, this is it. Last chance. And please come up to the podium, to the lectern. You can speak and then fill out a speaker's card. You'll have 3 minutes. Yeah. Just introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Laszlo Tókés, and I also live at Barron Park, 4133, and I am an original owner, living there since '79. I would like to call your attention to the fact that Thainway, whereas it is a city street, but it has only sidewalk on one side, and it is an integral part of the community. We have their tennis court, we have their swimming pool, community halls, and so on, and we cannot afford any added children's thoroughfare there who are likely to cause problems with these facilities we have there. We had these problems in the past while the fire lane, which has been referred to next, going all the way to El Camino, has been opened, and we had vandalism galore. So that's why the fire lane is now closed. It's only accessible for fire emergency. So Thainway, whereas it is a city street, it is not a public street in the true sense. We would strongly discourage you using that as a thoroughfare. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any other public speakers? Please fill out your card. Yeah. Okay, if that's the case, I will now close the public hearing and we will return to the board for comments. And just for members of the public, this is a preliminary review. We are not taking action on this. This project has a long way to go, so you'll have other opportunities to speak to this project. Board Member Liu, will you please give your comments?
So, thank you, Ken. I think you have a very challenging site, which is the trapezoidal shape and just the context around it. I think is a very difficult site. I do generally like your approach of like stacked flats and a mix of units. I think that's something that a lot of developers avoid. I've worked on them. They're very challenging to design. But you get a wider range of units in a wider mix than we currently see from typical spec developments. I would just say there were a couple things, I haven't really looked at your site really carefully, but I think there were a couple things that struck me as, one is I was thinking that a better driveway approach would be from on the other side of your property. Then you're showing it on the Zen Hotel side.
Right on the south side.
And just in terms of, when I went to your site, just in terms of feeling and stuff, it seemed like having it closer towards...
We had it.
The north, yeah. That seemed like a much better feel, and then you might not have to remove the big pepper trees and stuff on the other side. I don't know what that effect would have on your parking and whatnot, but it seemed like a better location to me. Regarding the 4-foot grade change, you're sort of raising the grade 4 feet. It seems kind of excessive to me. It seems like your site is relatively flat. I mean, I would push for as low as low as you can. I do think that there's just for privacy from the units, going up a couple feet makes sense, and I think that's traditionally done in Midwestern and East Coast cities. I think 4 is kind of high. I don't know. I mean, I think it's 4 with the 4-foot fence is way too much. But if it's a landscape fence, I think that would help. I do support the transportation comment about connectivity to Thane Way, and even if it doesn't happen, I think we should sort of plan for it. I think my point is, let's plan for it. If the neighbors object and it's locked and it's a gate, that's fine. That might change in 100 years, whatnot. It may change. The feeling may change, and at least it could happen at a later date. If you have some sort of underground garage here, then it would sort of prohibit connectivity in the future. There's a whole bunch of connections, pedestrian connections, between cul-de-sacs in Los Altos, Mountain View, whatever, and I go cut through all of them on my bike, and really nothing happens. I mean, I go through all of them, nothing happens there. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's a big issue. Although I understand that if they have concerns of vandalism and stuff in the past, I understand you'd be concerned. Generally, if you have like a lot of residents and eyes on the street, it sort of self-polices itself. Is my take on it. And I've worked on a lot of new urbanist projects where they have these sort of cut-through pathways that connect different houses. On the design of your project, Ken, I'm a little concerned about the the sawtooth. I guess you have kind of like a zigzag sawtooth edge of the facade. Can I just, if I could overgeneralize about like a lot of multifamily units, is that the side walls don't get nearly as much attention as the front facades, and you're exposing a lot of the side facades of your building. So I would be sort of careful about those, and the ones that are most exposed, I think maybe could get more texture or materials than the ones that are, yeah. So like where the bathroom windows are, or your bedroom windows. Yeah. I'd be concerned about that. And I think in one of your studies you were showing corner windows. And I'm not sure I would necessarily require them, but like when I've worked on units like this, the corner windows made a huge difference inside the unit. They made them feel much more spacious. And then on the outside, it helps dematerialize the corner. If you are committed to the windows as you're shown here, I want as much recess as possible, and I think you're showing more in plan than what's being shown in the perspectives. And then I think my last comment is on the parking. I don't really quite get the parking and the units. It seems like they're very different, and I've never seen a project quite like this before, and it doesn't really quite make sense to me. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a strange thing for like ownership. I mean, usually has some sort of. Typically they would have like a garage, like a private garage, so they can store things and stuff. It seems a little strange having it open like this. If you have precedents or something, other projects, I mean, I've never seen it, and it just seems very unusual to me. And that's all that I have at this time.
Board Member Guyer.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think even 3/4 of an acre for 21 units, I think is awfully dense to begin with. But I guess if you're going to put it anywhere on El Camino, it'd be as good as any. I'm not a big fan of the taking one unit and then repeating it 7 times next to each other in a sawtooth arrangement like this. Either it just becomes way too repetitive, you know, and there's no distinction between anything. I'm the 4th unit or the 2nd unit. I'd rather see a little bit more variation. Either treat them as 2 separate buildings that have, you know, whatever, 10 or say 12 and 8 units in each one, or I don't know, do something where they're all unique. I also am not a big fan of turning your back on El Camino, because that's basically what you're doing. All the entrances are on the front, and yet there's this sort of somewhat of a perception that there is entry off El Camino, and yet theoretically El Camino, the portion along El Camino is going to be your backyard, and nobody's going to sit in that backyard. I mean, let's face it, it's too small to do anything, and you're sitting next to a 6-lane highway. So, I mean, you know, this isn't the cute little let's sit out in our patio and enjoy the view. Nobody's going to do that. At least I can't see doing that, no matter how, you know, nicely you decorate that. So I think that's just not really doing anything for you. I guess the whole stucco box with wood siding on it is just, I've seen too many of those things. I want to see a little bit more. You know, this looks good maybe at a single-family residence where you get some creativity, but seeing it 7 times identically in a row is just. I think we can, you know, something can be done that's better than that. I do agree that it is an unusual parking situation, or a solution, if you want to call it. But I think the reality of it is similar to what one of the fellow board members said here, is that I think there's almost no open space in this project. So I think it wouldn't be that tough to increase the podium over the back corner, so you get some more open space on the. Because basically, what the reason it was done this way, and the way I see it, is as a cost measure, so you don't have to make a complete podium, and which means extra structure, extra columns, that sort of thing, and I think it's at a detriment to the people that are using the space in the back. Because I mean, there are 21 families in this, and so I mean that's 50 to 60 people maybe in this place, and that little green area back there is going to get awfully busy with 60 people in there. So I mean, I just don't see that working. And I mean, the things such as the transition in the front, I'm well aware is just way too early at this point. I knew that wasn't your final solution. So I'm just going to say, obviously, the way it is right now, I'm not a fan, but then I never expected that this would be your solution for the final one. So I'll just hold off on that. And I think that's it for now.
Okay, Board Member Malone Pritchard.
So thanks for bringing this forward as a preliminary. I know you know the drill and all the additional information we'll need for the formal. The neighbors have commented on, you know, more context information. We'll definitely be looking for that to see what the sightlines are and the scale, context, materials, etc. Wasn't happy to see that wall along El Camino in this packet. I'm glad to hear that you're looking at making that softer and lower. I think I'm in agreement with, I think it was Alex, who said maybe the 4-foot grade change may be a bit too much. I do appreciate having the units elevated a little bit above El Camino. I think that's an important separation to have, but perhaps not 4 feet. Eyes on the street, I think, are a really important element here. And Lee had touched on this, and I'd like to agree with him on the idea of flipping the ground floor units. I don't think you necessarily have to have the entrance from the street. I think you can still have the entrance from the same side. that you currently have it, but if you were to get the living room facing on El Camino, that's more of an eyes on the street rather than having the bedrooms facing El Camino. And I think there's a way to do that and not have an issue with accessibility. The Thaneway pedestrian connection is something that I think should happen, and I would hope it doesn't have to be a future thing. At the very least, you should plan for it for the future. I would prefer to see it actually happen. It is important to have connections, and because Thaneway is a public street now, anybody can go down there now, and apparently you're no longer having issues with graffiti, etc. So I don't think that having this project connect to your street is going to give you any additional problems. So that's all I've got for now.
Vice Chair Pop.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with many of the statements that have already been made, so I won't repeat a lot of that, but I do think it's very important for you to respond to the neighbors in terms of some visual simulations, and maybe even bring us an animation or something that will help those who have trouble visualizing to really understand what's being proposed. The corner of Maybell and El Camino is a really tough one, where the Zen Hotel is. There's a bus stop there. There's a lot going on at that corner. And the idea that we would have 50 or 60 people who are potentially traveling up Maybell to get to school and doing all kinds of things, having to go out onto El Camino and wrap around is a terrible idea. It's just a terrible idea to say that they're going to have to do that. And I will go back to a project that I worked on years ago in its early stages, not the final stages, but the early stages, which is the Palo Bowling Alley and the housing that was associated with that. And the Monroe Park neighbors got together and said, we need a bike path behind this property. And there was an agreement that was made and an arrangement that was done, and there was a connection made between Monroe and Cesano Court. It's virtually identical to this. And I can tell you that my son rides on that bike path every single day, and I'm always happy that he's not out on El Camino riding his bike as he goes up to Los Altos High School. And so I think that I'm going to be much stronger than my fellow board members here and say that I believe a condition of this project should be that you provide a connection to that. And in the time that that's been open, there's not been one problem with the kids riding through that neighborhood. There's not been any vandalism. There's not been an increase in any trouble. It's frankly just nice to have a little bit more traffic. People are walking. It's a connection between neighborhoods, and I think that that's good for everybody. I think it would be fine to say that you prohibit motor vehicle access through that so that people aren't driving scooters and things through there. But my sense is that ultimately this is one of those little pieces that will make the neighborhood better. I do also want to come out strongly and say that I think 4 feet is way too much to be out of the ground. 2 feet should be the maximum, I think. You just need to excavate a little bit more. And I think no matter what your fence design is, people are going to grow landscaping there, and that's going to be the wall. And it will be too tall. And people who buy these units are perfectly aware of the fact that they're buying units on El Camino Real, and there's a privacy issue associated with that. And you just have to accommodate that. If it's some screening inside the windows for the evenings when the windows become transparent, whatever you need to do. But Robert is correct. It's not going to be a very pleasant area to sit out there. It's pretty small, and I don't think people will spend a lot of time out there. And so, to me, it's more of a visual nod than a really functional space. And so I just want to make sure that it has the best visual character that it can have, and I'd like it to be quite a bit lower than it is. I'll also agree with Board Member Goyer's comments about the repetitive nature of this project. It's too repetitive to me, and I think that the South El Camino design guidelines speak very clearly about the need for major massing. And while I'm not challenged by the sawtooth design that you have here, and there are other examples of projects that do that along El Camino, I'm thinking of a hotel that's down in Mountain View and some other places, I think that you need to do something potentially with the roof forms, somehow make the interior units different than the exterior units, take better advantage of the fact that you have north and south walls that are open and could have a very different articulation. I like the idea of corner windows and doing something significant there that really gives this a little more character than it has now, and provides some variety and interest. It's just a little too much of all the same for me right now. And I'll look forward to seeing what you're doing in terms of landscaping and other things, but I do think that, particularly in light of the fact that you'll be changing from RM15 to RM30, hopefully, and the
Nobody has commented on that.
yeah, no, I'm gonna get that for you. So, particularly in light of the fact that you're changing from the RM15 to the RM30, I think that there is, there's such a significant financial gain to be had from that that goes far beyond the challenge and the timing and the carry and all those things that you'll have to do to go through that process, that asking for some additional open space and creating a connection to that Thane Court, maybe covering that back area where the additional tandem parking is shown now, and just enlarging that open space seems very appropriate. But I really believe that the density that you're proposing is much more appropriate for El Camino. And having the RM15 zoning, which would allow it, by my calculations, 11.4 units, versus the, I think it's 22.8 units that you'd actually be allowed under the RM30. We're struggling all the time to find out how to solve the housing obligation that we have, and there's a lot of argument about whether that's appropriate or not, but that's irrelevant to the discussion. We have an obligation right now. We can fight that, but currently the obligation exists. And so I think when we have a site like this, and we have an opportunity to provide additional housing, and we can do it in a way that is controlled in terms of its impact, as this is, I think it's really a great idea to increase the density and to take every advantage of opportunities to provide housing. I think one of the great benefits of this is when you do 21 units of housing instead of 11, we get that many more BMR units too. And so there's lots of positives about increasing the density for a project like this, and lots of other sites in the city where increased density is challenging, along El Camino, in a place like this where you're close to transit and you have access to freeways, and for all the right reasons, I think this is a place to consider that. It's 10 more units. That's all we're talking about here, and so it's not a giant impact in terms of what it does to the school and all those things. Cumulatively, these things all increase, but it seems to me like this is a great idea for this site.
Yeah, there's not much that I disagree with what my colleagues have said here. In fact, I'm in agreement with most of the comments that they've said, and I won't reiterate them. I want to take a different approach at looking at this. If you look at the site itself, you've created housing on an island. You have a depressed parking area, which is a moat, and you've cut yourself off from the back of the property there. You have El Camino Real, where you don't have any connectivity, direct connectivity to the units themselves. So, and you have a driveway on the widest, on the ramp, which cuts yourself off from that part of the property. So what I see here is problematic, which is that people are going to drive to this development, and they're going to park underground, and they're going to come up through the elevator, and when they want to leave, they're going to get back in their car and they're going to drive again. You've done nothing to enhance or create pedestrian or public connectivity to El Camino Real or the adjacent neighborhood. And I think that that's really problematic,
and in some ways antithetical to what we're trying to create in this community. What comes to mind is some of the problems that we have with Arbor Real, and I'm going to use that as an example, where Arbor Real looks internal to the site and it doesn't really look out into the community. It doesn't put any eyes on El Camino Real. It doesn't create connectivity to El Camino Real. Again, that is an island unto itself. I think the flip side of that is that the example that Vice Chair Pop had used, which is the housing in Monroe Park that's directly behind the Hilton, because of that pedestrian pathway, that bicycle pedestrian pathway that goes through and it goes to a cul-de-sac, similarly, begins to take that housing and bring it into the Monroe Park neighborhood, as well as linking up with a bicycle bridge that goes into another neighborhood in Palo Alto, so that we wind up with this network of roads that, bicycle and pedestrian pathways that actually get you through many of these neighborhoods. And that's where this project fails, is that we've had multiple projects that have come up where the neighbors have said no pedestrian connectivity. Well, the problem is that it's the pedestrian connectivity that actually makes our neighborhoods stronger. And having kids go through there on the way to school and home again reinforces the whole notion of safety, because the Safe Routes to Schools program keeps an eye on the students and are also keeping an eye on what goes on in those neighborhoods, because they don't want their kids going through places where it's unsafe. So I'm in complete support with connectivity to the cul-de-sac, and I hear what the neighbors are saying, and a couple of ways of handling that are to actually have the pathway zigzag through the site in a way that it's not a direct line of sight access like or a wide access the way a fire road would be, where you have to get the fire truck through there, and so you're just looking from point A to point B. If you're forced to walk through the development and meander, and you had to go past all the homes, and there's connectivity from the condominiums to that path, again, you're forcing everyone to have to go past somebody's house and they're vetted before they get through to the cul-de-sac, and vice versa. And it works both ways. It works to the benefit of the neighborhoods of the residents of Barron Square to be able to then get out to El Camino Real, and we want them to walk El Camino Real. And as residents age, that connectivity becomes far more important when they're not driving. So, I think I've spoken enough to that. You did another project over at 1845 El Camino, I think it is. And with that, I like the look of that building. I looked at it again recently, and No, I looked at your drawings. Yeah. And we really scrutinized the elevation of that building, and I think that there's a lot that you could take from that in applying it to these units. What I'd like to see is it may be expressed as 2 or 3 buildings rather than repetition of units. I think that we need to have more eyes on El Camino Real. There needs to be more activities in the front. I'm in agreement with the not having a grade change of 4 feet. That represents a 40-foot long ramp if you had to have it come off of El Camino Real. And if you brought it to 2 feet, that's a 20-foot ramp. There's a big difference. I think you can have some connectivity or front doors that are facing El Camino Real and have a ramp that's approachable from there without much problem if it's 2 feet. And you wanted us to speak to the zone change on it, even though we're really not, that's not our purview. I think higher density is really important here. We're looking for housing sites throughout the city. We're struggling. I think if you take a look at the housing that's done in the SOFA area, that's put RM40 next to R1 development in a very successful way. And so I think that it's not problematic to have the higher density adjacent to R1. And you've done a great job with regard to the daylight plane in terms of getting that separation. So those are my comments. Do we have any more comments from board members here? Board Member Liu?
So Ken, in some cities like Emeryville and Oakland, there are mixed units where there's like a home office space that faces like a major public street, and it's a residential unit, but the very first entry room that you walk into is kind of ambiguous. It could be used, in a number of different ways. And I was wondering if you had thought about any kind of thing like that on this project. I know we don't really have that in our zoning exactly, but it seems like this would be like the perfect place to design something that's like a little bit, more ambiguous. I know like Emeryville and Oakland have a completely different kind of demographic, which is much more single-person households and stuff. It's not Palo Alto, but I've looked at those units, and they're kind of, the spaces, the first entry spaces, they're a little strange when you walk into it because we're not used to seeing that here. But it seems like it could be a possibility to address like some of the board's comments that they want more eyes on the street, but yet you still have accessibility issues with the front door. So anyway, I would just say like maybe consider that. I don't really know what your market is for these. And but yeah, I would say consider that possibility. And I think that, and you asked us to comment on the zone change. I think one of to me, is, in designing of these, the issue is the height and bulk more so than the number of units. Because density is kind of a funny one, because you could be designing a one-bedroom unit, or you could be designing a 6,000 square foot penthouse like we have downtown. So it's kind of it's a weird one. So to me, I just look at the mass and not the number of units typically. And the difference between RM15 and RM30 is, for height, is a 5-foot difference. So I guess in going forward in this one, I would look at that, how you make that transition between the lower density around your project, which are, I think it's typically 2 stories. And yeah, Barron Square is a little bit more varied in your project. And in particular, I would look at the end units that are the most exposed. To see how you make the transitions. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, this is, as I said, this is a public hearing. We're not taking any action, and you'll have plenty of opportunity to react to future hearings. So I will close the public hearing and close this portion of the meeting. Item number 4, 250 Hamilton Avenue is being continued. And board staff announcements, updates, reports, and comments. We have a retreat coming up on June the 9th with the City Council. Actually, it's a joint City Council ARB meeting, and so we need to go through and talk a little bit about proposed topics. So any of my colleagues have anything burning that they want to discuss with the city council, we should list those, and then we would finalize that agenda with the mayor and vice mayor. Board Member Malone Pritchard, any thoughts? Board Member Liu?
Can you refresh my memory? Is this separate from the zoning change?
It is. I'm sorry. We're talking about a joint city council ARB meeting on June the 9th. It was originally June the 2nd, and then they switched it to June the 9th. And it may get changed again.
I'll just confirm, June 2nd is the date the sidewalk ordinance is, the alternative recommendations are to be considered and then by council, and then June 9th is the joint meeting, so it happens after their consideration.
Right, and Board Member Pop is going to be going to the June 2nd meeting. So any... Alex, do you have anything you want
to... No. My recollection is that we were going to have a subcommittee make the agenda for this, like at our last retreat. I thought that we sort of set up a process to make the agenda for this. I mean, usually it's the board and vice chair meet with the mayor and vice mayor.
Correct. I just want to get topics. That's all. If you have any thoughts, Board Member Guyer, Board Member Pop.
No, I'm okay.
So I think talked about this.
Go ahead.
Briefly, but I think that the thing that I think would be great for us to talk about with council is how the ARB can best serve the council, the type of work that we're doing, the role that we play, talking a little bit about how to clarify within the community what our role is, what our responsibility is, what our charge is, and making sure that the process by which we're doing that is engineered in the most efficient and effective manner. And if there's a recommendation from council about how we could be functioning differently or more effectively, I'd like to know that. I'd like to have an opportunity to talk to the council a little bit about some of the challenges that we've faced in regard to public comment and perception, and make sure that we're all on the same page about what this board does and the way it's doing its job going forward.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think that there's a major disconnect going on in the city right now with regard to the work of the ARB and what our responsibility is, and where our purview ends and what our role is. And I think part of it is education, and I think also part of it is bringing to City Council awareness how we've gone through and done reviews on a number of projects. And so I think Vice Chair Pop and myself have talked about this with the director as well as the chief planning official, perhaps having us do a report to council on the work that we've done over the last, say, 2 years, and just simply talk through some of the statistics, the number of reviews, the number of projects, how many times a project has come back to us, ones that we've had particular difficulty with. And it goes on both sides, which is that there's some people out there that believe that we have too much authority, and there are a number of people out there that think that we don't have enough authority. And I think
we need to do a little bit of education, I think, in terms of what our board does and how we go about doing it. So what I would like to do is have it focus on report to council in terms of some of these statistics. We've gotten the okay from the director to get some staff time behind that. And what I'd like to do is to have Vice Chair Pop lead that with one other member from the ARB to arrange that, to getting that information together. And then what we would do is we would have it agendized as a regular meeting on June the 5th. That's the Thursday before we meet with the City Council, and then actually make our presentation the following Monday. So do I have a volunteer to work with Vice Chair Pop on this? Thank you. Thank you, Board Member Malone Pritchard.
I just have a quick question. When you say a disconnect, you're talking about the public, not other.
I think the disconnect
commissions or okay. So you're looking at it at both ends. I mean, it's not only the public that may not know what we can or do or don't do or whatever, but there are also other commissions that feel.
And I think there's also, I'm going to call it like it is. I think there's city council members that don't know exactly what we do and why we're different than the planning commission.
All right, and that's what I wasn't sure about. Okay.
So, so yeah, I think it's important that we have a meaningful discussion, and we do it in a measured way, and we actually have some projects behind this, and we put some meat into it and talk about the work that we do and what's important. So is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's great. I think it would be very beneficial for us on the 5th to have, enough time allocated in our schedule to be able to really have a very clear discussion about what we're going to do, so that each of the board members has an opportunity to provide some input into the draft of what we'll be presenting to the council. My guess is that we need to have that documentation prepared far enough in advance that we can get it into the packet. So is the 5th realistic for that?
Well, that's the next meeting. We want to advertise that we're going to spend a session on our agenda for the 5th, and take an hour. I'll have statistics for you, and we can talk about how we, put those forward. There's a staff report that I've already written in draft that says these are the topics. So helping me get those bullets together would be great. And then we can follow it up with a document.
Glad to do that. I think that our time with the council is precious, and it seems like this is a significant priority. Putting together this report is a significant priority. When we spoke to the director, she indicated that she would provide whatever support was necessary in order to get that done, and so I'm not sure what that means, but okay. So, sorry. But, I was also suggesting that there might be some administrative aspect to this, where we're just going back through the old agendas and identifying, the number of projects that we've looked at, the number of times that each of those projects has been looked at, what the result was, whether it was approved or denied, et cetera. There are projects that come to mind that we've even reviewed 4 times. And so I think it's important to be really clear about how my goal in this is to be clear about how critical we are of the work that comes before us, and how careful we are with our approvals, and that we are not taking this responsibility lightly, that the projects that we might use as examples would be both those that come forward that are very capable projects and get approved quickly, and those projects that have had dramatic change through the course of interacting with the board. Projects that come to mind are like 500 University and 405 Kirtner, and some of these projects that we really have, I think, had great success with applicants and had a very productive and valuable interaction. So.
I think one of those statistics that is interesting is, when projects come through for prelim and then formal, and what's the rate of appeal on those versus, ones that don't come through for prelim. That type of, statistic might be of interest.
Definitely of interest.
Yeah. And I just wanted to report on the flip side of that, which is that our Palo Alto, we had a meeting with regard to the director and chief planning official with regard to our Palo Alto, and what our role in our Palo Alto will be is to talk about or begin to have a dialogue on design. And what it would represent is a one-day facilitation that would happen in a public facility somewhere, and it would probably be, we talked about either, I think it was July or August, maybe even September. And that it would just simply be a one-day facilitated by a group of architects or design professionals trying to get the community to talk about design and think about design. And so we've just started that discussion, but hopefully once we are able to talk to the city council, we get some feedback from them, and it would then dovetail or feed into our Palo Alto and that facilitation. So that's our thought as to what the outcome would be on this. Any other comments on this? Okay. So just to let you know, the subcommittee is rotating. Today is board members Lou's last day on the subcommittee, and board member Malone Pritchard will take over on the 5th of June. So thank you.
I'll just say thank you to board member Lou for what was an extended term on the subcommittee. Appreciate you having done that.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.